Thanks, Senator Johnson. Well, let's talk for a minute about subsidies that might distort these markets. It seems to me that it's fairly elementary economics that the negative externalities from a product ought to be included in the price of the product in order for the proper market decisions to be made. I think that's basically Milton Friedman, Econ 101. Does anybody disagree with that proposition? Okay, no evident disagreement. So and let's just go back. The most famous negative externality is, of course, pollution, is it not? Across the economic literature.
Are you including the negative externalities, Senator, attendant upon renewable, unconventional energy?
I'm asking the general economic question, whether we all agree, which we seem to, that negative externalities under basic market theory ought to be included in the price of the product so the market can work correctly. And if that's true, then if there are negative externalities that are not baked into the price of the product, it would seem to me that that would count as a subsidy. In fact, economists regularly refer to those socialized negative externalities as subsidies. That's a fairly standard proposition in economic literature, isn't it? Mr. Ramey?
Just minor distinction, typically I think we would refer to unpriced externalities as an indirect subsidy, whereas a tax credit or a grant would be a direct subsidy.
Yeah, but a subsidy nonetheless.
Yes.
And that's widely accepted as the appropriate terminology in the economic literature, correct?
In environmental economics, the field that I know, yes.
Yeah. Dr. Simeonuk.
And if I may add, the International Monetary Fund, to put this into perspective, estimates about 1 trillion or even less in direct subsidies. In 22, they were above 1 trillion. But these indirect subsidies amount to $5 trillion. And I just want to add that our estimates about economic competitiveness do not take into account these indirect subsidies because, as you say, they aren't priced.
Yeah, in fact, I was going to raise that International Monetary Fund number myself. The most recent one that I have seen from the International Monetary Fund for indirect subsidy of fossil fuel just in the United States is $660 billion every year. That is a very, very big subsidy for renewals to have to climb uphill against. Is that part of, Dr. Simeonuk, is that the U.S. part of the number, the $5 trillion number you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks very much. Do you want to, okay. Well, let me ask, I'd like to ask a series of questions of Mr. Zeichel, if you'd stand by for a moment. First of all, you seem to be agreeing that negative externalities under economic theory ought to be into price, and that when they're not, that's an indirect subsidy of the product whose negative externalities are not priced. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, reviewing your testimony, I'm just a little bit confused by it, and I'd like to go through some of the propositions. You seem to be saying on occasions that the Earth just isn't warming, that in 2015...
That's not what I said at all.
Well, you have an exhibit that says there are no significant trends in warming. You then separately say that there is, in fact, a 1.1 degree increase since 1880, and that roughly half of it is produced by anthropogenic sources, which I presume you mean fossil fuel combustion.
Well, much of it is fossil fuel combustion, not all of it.
You say roughly half.
Anthropogenic sources are man-made. Natural variability is not.
And you think that half of the 1.1% increase that we've
The
seen.
available evidence
is
in the peer-reviewed
anthropogenic.
literature suggests that about half of the 1.1 degree temperature increase since 1850 is anthropogenic. Yes, that's correct.
And of the anthropogenic, it's essentially all carbon combustion.
Well, no, it's not all, it's.
Essentially
Some
all.
of it is agriculture, some of it is cement production. It's anthropogenic in the form of the emissions of greenhouse gases. It's not all
Okay,
fossil.
I'll take that. Emission of greenhouse gases, not just pure
Right.
CO2 combustion.
Right.
So as recently as 2020, you've said there's no consensus among scientists about climate science. Is that a proposition you will stand by here today?
About climate science.
Yep.
I don't even understand I didn't say that.
Actually, you did, and we'll get that information to you, but no point quarreling over it now.
Where in my statement do you see that?
No, this is in 2020. It was in a document called A Critique of the House Republican Climate Policy Proposals.
There's no consensus on the equilibrium climate sensitivity of the climate system. In other words, if you emit another ton of greenhouse gases, what is the effect on temperatures after the climate system adjusts fully? There's no
So
consensus.
saying
on
that one additional aliquot of carbon dioxide can't predict precisely
No.
a degree
we
of
do not
temperature
know.
increase.
We do not
That's a different
know.
thing than saying that there's no consensus among scientists about climate science. Would you concede that you may have overstated the proposition?
I would have to see what I said.
Okay,
Senator.
well, let's move on then, because we don't have that in front of us.
Fine.
In 2019, when President Trump said that global warming is a hoax, you said there is very substantial truth in that statement. What did you mean by saying that there's
Well,
very substantial
You know,
truth in
I
President
would be
Trump
the
calling
first to
this a
agree
hoax?
that the precise use of language is not among Mr. Trump's political habits and mannerisms. What he actually said was a lot of it is a hoax. Now, the argument that.
Is a lot of it a hoax?
A lot of it is a hoax. Well, I don't know what a lot of it means.
Well, you're the one who
I-
said
I-
very substantial.
Pardon me?
You're the one who used the words very substantial.
Well, the argument
that a
that
lot?
there's a crisis looming is a hoax. The argument that a U.S. net zero policy will make an appreciable difference is a hoax. There are lots of hoaxes in this debate. It
All
does
right.
not mean that anthropogenic warming itself is a hoax. It certainly is not.
You said in 2015 that since the implementation of the Kyoto Protocol, the satellite temperature record essentially has been flat. Now you say 1.1 degrees since 1880, and half of it is greenhouse gas emissions, correct?
Well, the satellite record begins in 1979, not 1880, Senator.
You used the term 1880.
Well, that's the surface temperature record, not the satellite record. The satellite record begins in 1979, and then the question is, how do you interpret the changes in mid-tropospheric temperatures over the last 40 years? That's much more difficult, but there certainly has.
It was your intention in 2015 to convey the notion that global warming was not happening because the satellite temperature record was flat, right? What other point would you have been making?
No, there was a hiatus after the El Nino of 1998,
Gotcha.
ending to something like 2014 or something. I have to go back
Okay.
and look.
So you meant that during there was.
That does not mean, Senator, that climate change or anthropogenic climate change, quote, is not happening. There are anthropogenic effects. There's natural variability. We don't understand the relationships between the two. And to say that the temperature is not changing over some short period of time does not mean that there's no anthropogenic warming. Of course,
I will agree with you on that very point. Thank you. I think that's wisely stated. And you concede that the 10 warmest years in the historical record have all occurred since 2010.
no, that's certainly not correct. That is certainly not correct. The argument that you see in the literature, especially from in the National Climate Assessment, that there's been an increase in extreme temperatures
So this graph
Yeah.
is not correct,
No, it is correct.
and are not the top 10 temperature years all up here in the
I
last
can't really,
last
I'm
10?
not sure what the base period is. I can't really read that chart very well. What's
Well, you
really,
should know it reasonably well because it's actually in your testimony.
yeah, that's right. Well, I'm not
Right?
sure if it's the same one. I have one very similar to it. It may be the same
And
one.
does your one very similar to it also show that the top 10 years, the top 10 heat years,
I'm sorry, what?
the 10 warmest years in the historical record have all occurred since 2010?
I don't.
Your
think
graph
that-
and this graph both show the same temperatures, correct?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I have to go
Okay.
look.
Well, let me go on a little bit just to some of the things that you've said. Has the climate industry evolved into a totalitarian ideology?
Well, climate policy has evolved into a totalitarian ideology, controlling how people move, controlling the type of heaters they use, controlling the type of stoves they use, controlling the characteristics of the homes they live in.
You draw an equivalence
transportation.
in the statement that you said the climate industry evolved into a totalitarian ideology, is your quote. And you make a reference in that quote, in that passage, also to Benito Mussolini. What is the point of making a reference to Benito Mussolini in the context of the discussing what you call the
It
climate
was,
industry?
Mussolini's quote was that everything within the state, everything by the state, everything for the state, and we have arrived not far from the position in which everything is climate, everything is part of climate, and everything is driven by climate.
All right.
So it really is, I think, there is a certain totalitarian flavor at a minimum.
And to add to that, you've also compared environmentalist views as strangely reminiscent of Joseph Stalin's view of the difference between one death and millions. What is your point in trying to compare environmentalists and Joseph Stalin?
The environmental left has made no secret of its lack of caring about the deaths of many millions of people in the third world as a result of energy shortages and all the rest. They've
Is
been
that
quite
why you-
explicit about that.
Is that why you say environmentalists hate humanity?
Yeah, I do actually, yes, that is why I say that.
Okay.
Or left-wing environmentalists, I don't know that.
Well, let's talk about a non-left-wing environmentalist who's on this committee, Senator Graham. He suggested that Republicans should put together their own environmental plan as an alternative to the Green New Deal. You responded that he was embracing an anti-human world view, and that the mere endorsement of a climate policy implies an endorsement of the climate crisis view. Was it your intention to compare Senator Graham with an anti-human?
Those are two separate statements, Senator. If fossil fuels are evil, then the factors that increase the demand for fossil fuels are also evil. Among them, prominently, are investments in human capital, healthcare, training, education, all the rest. If you really believe that fossil fuels are evil, then investments in human capital are also evil, and therefore.
Well, I don't think I've said that fossil fuels
I didn't say that
themselves
you
are
said
evil,
that,
but
Senator.
you have said that it's an anti-human world view.
Yeah, and I'm explaining why that is true.
Okay.
Okay, and what was
And
the second? What was
you're
the
saying that Senator Graham is embracing that anti-human worldview by agreeing to work or try to develop a climate policy?
No, what I said about Republicans endorsing climate policies is that if in fact they endorse climate policies, then they implicitly or explicitly are endorsing the climate crisis narrative for which there's no evidence. And once you adopt that stance, there's no principle to defend against the most extreme policy proposals. I never used or thought that Senator Graham was anti-human in any sense.
Well, that's good, because he and I are friends, and I don't think he is either. Before you became, Senator Lujan is here, are you ready to go, sir, or shall I? Okay. Before you began to offer testimony in the arena of climate change, you were often consulted and offered reports and so forth by the tobacco industry. Is that correct?
No, that's simply not correct.
No, you were not part of the Tobacco Institute's stable of consultants?
No, Senator. The late Professor Bob Tollison, for 2 or 3 years running, received small grants from the Tobacco Institute to organize sessions at the Western Economic Association annual meetings on the general topic of whether or not tobacco taxes are efficient economically.
Well, I'll tell you what I will do.
Well, Senator, if you would
since
let me
Senator
answer
Lujan
your
is
question,
here.
I'd appreciate it.
The question was quite simple. Were you paid by tobacco industry organizations or organized by them to provide
About
testimony, including the
$100
Tobacco Institute?
each year for about 2 or 3 years, yes.
Okay. Well, here's what I will do, because Senator Lujan is ready to go. I will review what I consider to be multiple occasions upon which you spoke for the tobacco industry against the regulation or taxation of cigarettes.
Well-
and I'll give you the chance in writing
Yeah.
to relate what your role was on all those various occasions.
I just told you what the role was.
Yeah, and I'll give you the chance to put that in writing.
Very good.
Senator Lujan.
Hey, before you click on the next video, if y'all could do me a big favor and hit that like button. The algorithm loves it, and so do I, because it helps promote these videos and get the message out about what our government has been doing. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications, because every time I put out a video, you want to know about it, right? Thanks again, and have a good one. See you on the next one. Peace.